Robert Furman, Robert Furman, F-U-R-M-A-N. I was an assistant to General Groves in the Manhattan District on his 21st Street offices here in Northwest. And I joined him in late autumn of '43, and left him right after the war, right after the end of the war.
Can we, just to, no one's going to hear what I say, so, and don't feel that I'm interrupting, because the beauty of editing is we can cut and paste things.
Sure.
But I think it would be nice to just get a little bit, if you can tell us in what year you were born, and something about your education and so forth, leading up to.
Yeah, I was born in Trenton, New Jersey, and went to Trenton High School, which was an excellent high school. Went to Princeton, got a degree in civil engineering. Got out in 1937. Einstein was on the campus at that time. I used to see his hair flying around all over the place. Princeton was a refuge at that time for a lot of people that were out of work. A lot of students' fathers were out of work, and they went to college to kill the time, and eventually, as the economy picked up, their fathers went back into their manufacturing businesses, and they were all very active again. But during that particular time of depression, we were all kind of penniless. It cost about $1,000 for everything at Princeton at that time. Today, it approaches $40,000 to $50,000. We got along quite well, and we earned extra money. I helped run a little sandwich shop just off campus, and I ran the theater. They had a great big theater downtown, right in Princeton, magnificent place where they brought Broadway hits, and I had the programs to print and the ushers to get there, and managed in this way to perhaps pay 3/4 of my Princeton expenses. After the war, I went to work. Wasn't too successful convincing the Pennsylvania Railroad to make me a vice president, so they had me out with a maintenance crowd. I went on to work for the FHA and finally Turner Construction Company. Turner is a big construction company out of New York, and it's well known even today. The war came along, and in 1940 I was drafted in. I was asked to join, and I came in as a second lieutenant at Fort Dix, and the draft occurred, and we processed all the people from several states through Fort Dix, put them in uniforms, and sent them off to training camps. It wasn't long before I got transferred to Washington, where I picked up, I was employed by the same people who eventually had charge of building all the camps and hospitals and airfields in the United States and the Pentagon. And I went over, I became one of the 5 subordinate officers to Colonel Renshaw, who was the boss of the Pentagon job. The Army supervised 40 or 50 architects and a great big team of general contractors in the building of the Pentagon. And our job was to try to stay on top of all that. When the Pentagon was finished, General Groves picked me up and I went into the Manhattan District, which is his atom bomb project, very quiet, very secretive. Everything was so secretive that it was 5 or 10 years after the war that I began telling people what I really should have told them at the outset to get the job done. After the war, I went into the construction business on my own, worked at that for 50 years, built about 800 buildings. Most of them are still standing. We go, if one of them is leaning, we go prop it up, you know, and try to keep it from collapsing. We quit that just recently, and I still have paperwork that I do as a result of that work, that general contracting work. But at times we had as many as 250 people on the payroll. Most of the time it was more like 70 or 80. We built churches and hospitals and gas stations and whatever came along. Schools, lots of schools. Still have a lot of friends out there that I hear from occasionally. Now I'm retired. I moved into a retirement center in Frederick, where they provide me with everything I need. And I work about a 12 or 15-hour week. The rest of the time I'm playing tennis if I can. And here I am today talking with you people here who are really running the world while I'm just sitting out there doing nothing. That's a brief history.
That's great. I love the way you begun this little story. Could you kind of tell us that in those words? I love the love and war.
The what?
Your little piece.
Yeah.
You describe it, love and war.
Oh,
Could you say that? Just the
love and war, it doesn't mix, and I can tell you that from experience, because at the very beginning of the war, I got engaged, and that poor lady, girl, suffered greatly, and finally, because I went into the Manhattan District, and I couldn't tell her what I was doing or where I was. I traveled everywhere. Finally, that broke up, and we had. I waited till I was. Waited another 6 or 8 years before I got married, but the war was for many people, a very stressful point. Many of the men overseas stayed overseas 5 years without seeing their wife and their children. Often forgotten. They never intended. They didn't anticipate, I should say, that there'd be such a division in their lives. But we got through it. We managed. General Groves brought me in to try to calm down the scientists who he had working on this project to develop the bomb. The scientists wouldn't concentrate on their work. They were scared that the Germans were years ahead of us and would bomb us almost immediately. So my job was to work with them and try to bring them information that would calm them down and get them back in their laboratories and at their desks. This meant that I had to work with the scientists and take them with me occasionally overseas. This meant that I had to struggle between the immense power that the Army had and the money they had to get this project done by scientists who were not related to them at all and didn't really see the need to have an army doing anything. They could do it all by themselves. There was tremendous friction between the two elements. But in spite of that, the job got done mainly because General Groves, at the top, worked so well with Oppenheimer, and it was a tough job for him to do. I went overseas the first time to meet with the British, who had all the intelligence on what was going on on the German side, if there was anything, they knew about it. And we, in America, had no real good intelligence services. So we relied on the British as a major source. Eventually, I went around to talk to all the various Army headquarters and Navy headquarters to let them know what I wanted to know without telling them what we were doing. And eventually some reports would drift back to me that they had received. But for the most part, they were interested in this great major buildup of armaments and military troops and supplies, and they didn't have much time for intelligence. We did pick up some very interesting information, though, from them. And we picked up information from DuPont and a lot of the larger corporations who had corporate intelligence services that they kept in touch with around the world. This led eventually to well, I should say that you might say the whole project, the Manhattan Project, was built on fear. Fear that the enemy had the bomb or would have it before we could develop it. And this they knew to be the case, the scientists did, because they were refugees from Germany, a large number of them, and they had studied under the Germans before the war broke out. We knew, as a result, I knew of 40 different German scientists that could be involved in a project that could develop a bomb. And during the rest of the whole time I was there, we were constantly looking for those names to appear in publications or whatever reports we could find, so that we knew if we knew what they were doing, we could better assess as to whether they were on track for developing a bomb. Very serious business. Eventually, as the war progressed, General Groves decided to put a mission following the armies in Europe. It'd be a scientific mission. It would be a mission composed of scientists representing all of the various scientific tracks, and buried into it would be 2 or 3 atomic scientists. And this mission would be there to answer questions by the generals as they went forward, who were constantly receiving threatening reports of devastating weapons which might be thrown against them. The mission was called the Alsos mission. It was put together in G2, it's the Army Intelligence Department. The name was a mystery name for the whole war, and for 10 years after the war. Nobody could figure out where the name came from. Eventually, I had to tell them that the colonel that I worked with was a Greek student, and Alsos is a Greek word for groves, grove of trees. Now that, if General Groves had known that, I would have been put up to the firing squad, because he didn't want to be any secret like that to get known. But this it's sort of an interesting little quirk of how this colonel and got the project properly named after all. Anyway, this scientific mission was very effective, and as the Army moved forward, it interviewed German scientists, all kinds of scientists, French, Belgian, whatever, and to pick up information as to what the Germans were doing. One of the most important reports they wrote was called the Strasbourg Report, which really told General Groves and President Roosevelt that the project, that they didn't have a project. They were focusing on rockets. And of course, I must say, we focused our attention on Heisenberg, who was the chief scientific atomic scientist in Germany, and we knew that wherever he would be, that's where the project would be. Later on, when the bomb was ready, General Groves sent me out to pick it up in Arizona, at New Mexico rather, at Los Alamos, and I traveled with the bomb, took it all the way over to Tinian, first by air to California, and then on the Indianapolis, the cruiser Indianapolis to Tinian. And I waited there until the bomb was dropped. And after that, I went into Japan on a special mission that General Groves set up to look at all the universities, all the colleges, factories, to see if we could determine what the capacity of the Japanese were, whether they had something going or not. Then I came home and very soon got out and started my construction business. And that's briefly is my war story. And I think that the bomb was, it's a miracle the bomb was developed. It's wonderful that we were able to use it to end the war. If the bomb had not been dropped and the war had continued, thousands of people would have died on both sides, particularly if we had invaded Japan. We might be talking about 1 million people in such a terrible invasion process. The biggest miracle is that after the war, after 60 years now, we have not had another atomic bomb incident. It's been lucky, and we should direct our attention to every effort to prevent any possible occurrence, such as a war which might use nuclear weapons. I'll take a breath here.
That's good. That's great. Do you want to take
Is that what you want to do?
What's that?
Is that what you wanted?
Yeah, that was great. It's not all I want, but it's a great start. Yeah, you've got some great stuff in there.
And to Japan was
Just why don't we wait till
you wanna
you're
start,
sitting
yeah,
up?
sure,
Yeah,
sure.
if you want to talk about that, we want to make sure we get it recorded right.
the mission to Japan was divided into 3 parts. There was a medical mission and military mission that went directly to Hiroshima. Another similar group went to Nagasaki. Is that it?
Right.
What's the other city?
Nagasaki.
Nagasaki, yeah. And then the third was the one I had, which went to the universities and all the factories in Japan and Korea, looking for any trace of nuclear action. the people in these missions was really composed of those already at Tinian. There was a tremendous team of technical people, medical people there, and interpreters. So each team had medical people and had interpreters and scientists. I think Philip Morrison went with me. Philip Morrison recently died. He was a professor of physics at Cornell, I think, when he died. But this is the way they covered all the fronts, and those reports are available, and they completely tell the story of what was found when the Americans first arrived at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and what I found in the various university towns.
Can you tell us, what do you recall about what they found? Can you start with Hiroshima and Nagasaki, what people's reactions were as reported to you?
Well, if you're talking about what the Japanese people felt about it, it was pretty much, they were pretty much foreclosed from having any other opinion except the opinion and direction that the emperor gave. And one of the things we must not forget, that is one of the biggest heroes of the war was Hiroshima, the emperor of Japan, who had the guts to get on the radio and call the war off right after the bombings.
Could I interrupt a sec? I think you said Hiroshima. You mean Hirohito.
Yeah.
Right? Why don't you start again? Because I think that's a very nice piece.
Hirohito, that's right. Well, one of the things we forget, or we're apt to forget, is the tremendous and important role that the Emperor of Japan, Hirohito, played in ending the war. He was perhaps the biggest hero of the war when you think about it, because opposed by his army, he got up in front of them, got on the radio and called the war off. Wasn't that easy? Now, the people where I went did not complain about the war being over. I can remember that. They did not express complaints about the use of an atomic bomb. The general impression I got was that they needed to get reorganized and back up on their feet. And I think that sums it up, really. In other words, I didn't experience any great hatred for Americans as we proceeded with into the peacetime. And well, that's about all I can say about that.
Have you, I assume, been in contact with Japanese on and off over the last 60 years? Do you have any impression that those views changed? Have you felt that the Japanese, maybe I'm presuming you've had some contact with Japanese or have some impression, no?
No, I have not had any.
Okay.
I never traveled in that direction. Got as far as Alaska, but.
And what, how many weeks after the bombing did you have that mission? How long ago was that?
Well, the first bomb was August 6th. Second bomb about 6 or 8 days later. The mission was formed early in September. We got back to the States late in November, and I got out maybe about the 1st of January, something like that.
So you were in Japan about 2 months?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Tell us more about your mission, and was it like the Alsace, and you're looking to see whether the Japanese have been developing an atomic bomb? So just,
Yes.
again, use your words, no one will hear my question.
Well, in order to determine whether there was a project or not, we went to the universities because we knew that if there was a project, the scientists had to come from the universities. This would be a scientific project. Physicists would be involved. We had the names of about eight Japanese scientists who had studied in Japan, studied in Germany, and were capable of possibly capable of running a project if Japan had one. So then we went to the big corporations and just to inquire about their facilities, and went into their research departments, quizzed people, went out into the field, looked at properties, went to Korea. Don't forget, if they had a project, we knew it would have to be a tremendous project like Oak Ridge. If somebody showed us a 40,000-foot warehouse and said that was their project, why, we felt pretty safe. Because, Oak Ridge was 1 million feet. Our project, half the size of the state of Rhode Island. And as far as we knew, nobody could do it any quicker or any faster, although that was one of our fears, that maybe somebody would figure out a way to produce an atomic bomb in a different way than we were doing it. So that's about what we did. And we also, particularly in Korea, where they had mineral resources, we checked out all the mines to see if there was an interest in mining uranium or thorium, radium. That's where it all have to start. And from our report, from this we could make our report back that there was no serious project. And I think that report has stood up under questioning over the years. Every once in a while somebody wants to write an article saying that a secret plant was producing atomic bombs, and this we could easily check out and force them to remove the report.
I'd like to go back to, well, maybe we ought to go back to the Manhattan Project, and you're working with Groves. So since we were on the topic, just tell us about playing tennis with Groves and what kind of tennis player he was.
Well, he was a good tennis player.
Could you just start again and just say Groves?
General Groves loved to play tennis, and he played at the Army-Navy Country Club whenever he could. But he was very careful to stay out of tournaments, and he didn't want to become have any attention brought upon him. He there was a cab driver by the name of Austin Rice, and he and Austin Rice would play. Austin was an extremely good player and would feed the ball to General Groves, who couldn't move that much, so Austin was very careful and directed most of his shots right back to him. Occasionally, very rarely, I would get into a game with him, and because I think he thought he was a much better player than I am, and I think he was. His weight held him back, of course. He couldn't get around the court as fast as he should because his weight was he was such a big man. But that tennis was his sport, and he enjoyed it.
Great, that's terrific. We heard a lot about that from Gwen.
Yeah.
On our panel, and it'd be kind of nice. I'd like to, we have the exhibit that we opened at the State Department, if you noticed it in the lobby. It's
Yeah.
and we're gonna travel that and maybe develop a series of little short vignettes on different aspects of growth. So this will help contribute to that. Let's see. I'd like to go back to one of the things that Stan Norris says about you is you were the first atomic intelligence unit. Is that what they called it, or what was your title, or so? Or you just when you first worked for Groves?
General Groves faced this problem with his scientists, who had this tremendous fear of the Germans having a bomb well ahead of us, since most of his team of scientists had studied under the Germans, and the Germans were still there. And we didn't have any reports saying that, denying that they weren't busy and active. So until I came on board, there wasn't any effort, hadn't been any effort to try to find out more than they knew at that time, find out more about what was going on in Germany. And Groves' intention was to find out as quickly as possible in order to calm down his scientific team so that they keep on the job and not be scared all the time. So there was a group of scientists that I met with, major people that were involved with the project, Compton, Arthur Compton of Chicago, and Urey up in New York, and Lawrence out in California, Oppenheimer. And they fed me some names that I could work with. And this team of scientists suggested that we, for one thing, that we would go try to get scientific publications out of Germany and let them look at them, because if the scientists that we knew, I would say going back to we knew of the 40 German scientists that were nuclear scientists and would be involved in a project. If they were publishing, this would give us some idea of what they were thinking about. So through Switzerland mainly, we obtained scientific reports, and I passed them on to this committee, and they read them and made their comments and passed them out among the other scientists, all in an effort to try to calm down the scientists that were there. Also, if we found something important, we'd be gratified, but we never did. We never found out anything. that was except negative stuff, which meant negative by the means that these 40 scientists that we knew were not in any big nuclear bomb project. Then the Alsace mission was another wing of Grove's effort to obtain information, and as they moved forward, he got reports back of interviews with the German scientists as the armies went through eastern France and over into Germany. The scientists were picked up and talked to, and these reports went to Groves, and we got it out to all the scientists on the project, which gave the project scientists some relief to know that there probably wasn't a project going on. Now, what we didn't know was that the British had broken the code, and that the British were, of course, weren't willing to tell us they had broken the code for fear that this would leak out back to the Germans. So the British themselves were kind of quiet. They passed on information carefully to us to make sure that nothing could be tied back to this fact that that they had picked it up off the code break. And so right to the end of the war, there was a gap there that we never knew about. And the British had, of course, their own opinion well declared to us from the very beginning that their information was that the Germans had no project, no backup to it at all. And then they were, of course, the British were completely absorbed in their efforts just to stay alive, to survive the bombings and put their troops in the field and win the war. So that's about the atmosphere that we had to work with. And I guess about.
Were there British who actually went in France with you? Were you a sort of an allied team? Was it an American force with some British scientists, or did you work with the British as you were going into France and Germany?
Yes.
Yeah.
The answer is yes, the British worked right with us on our scientific efforts, our scientific project. Even had some people in the Alsace mission occasionally visiting, and we would consult with them when we found out information. They always were very helpful. But you got to remember, their country was being devastated by this war, and they were doing all they could just to stay alive.
I recall it was December 1944 that Joseph Rothblatt left the project because he had learned that there was no bomb from some British reporter. I don't know. Do you know, does that ring a bell? December 44, was that a time when the British had told us that they had evidence there was no German effort?
It doesn't ring a bell with my memory at all.
I don't know what, because obviously Alsace continued far beyond that. You were involved in what, April of 45, May, just as the VE Day was approaching. Can you, I thought one of the sort of exciting parts of Stan Norris's book is his descriptions of some of the situations you were involved in personally on your mission. Some ducking bullets and...
Oh, not much of that.
No?
I was never in great peril. if we we stayed back of the lines, 50 miles. One of the interesting things was that General Groves sent me a cable saying that Sir Charles Hambro, head of the Bank of England, was coming over to the Alsace mission for a visit. He also was a big wheel in the British government and ran 2 or 3 railroads, and big cheese, and take care of him. So Sir Charles appeared, and I found out immediately he'd like to get around the battlefields. I think the armies were up north. They hadn't crossed over into Germany yet. And one thing he wanted to do was put his feet in the Rhine River. He was a World War I hero, too, a soldier. And so we took him took him out to visit some of the old World War I battlefields, which were still visible. And we actually went to Strasbourg, and on a foggy morning, he went down to the Rhine River and put his feet in. It upset us that he would even try, because the Germans were on the other side of the river. Maybe they could see through that fog, I don't know, but we didn't want this guy hurt. And after 5 days of touring, he said to me, he said, "Furman, I want to throw a big dinner in my appreciation of what all you've done." And I said, fine. So we went to a French inn, and we gave the French didn't have much food, so we gave the French inn our rations, and they cooked up something, and they got some. The French came up. I remember they went down into one of their cellars and came up through the floor with a choice bottle of whiskey or wine or something. That this is going to be a big celebration, and we had a great time, great meal. And after it was over, I got the bill came in, and they gave it to Hambro, and he looked at it and he said, "Well, Furman said, I don't have any money. Will you pay this?" Now here's the head of the Bank of England, and I had to take I had to pay for it. So the next day or the day after, we took him back to the airport, and it was springtime, and I still remember him getting on the plane with 5 or 6 daffodils in his hand. And great guy. That was an incident that we all remembered.
No doubt. That's great. Clarify it. Wow. Huh. Let's see, I'm just looking at, actually, you personally were involved in discovering the scientists. I know that John Lansdale writes in his memoirs, Coming Upon Otto Hahn. Were you with him at that time? Were you working with Lansdale on it?
Yes, I was there.
Can you?
And Pash was there, and they
Can you start again?
We are now talking about the armies having moved forward, and we were able to go to the home of Otto Hahn, a principal German scientist, and Pash, Colonel Pash, who was head of the military side of the Alsace mission, and Sam Goudsmith both interviewed him, and I was there too. In which it was quite clear that at least he was not involved in any atomic project. And this occurred several times with other scientists as we came upon them. The same people or other people in the mission would interview them, and then we would write up the reports and send them back to the States. One time, General Groves sent a message over that I was to go to the Rhine River as soon as the troops got past, went over the bridge, Nijmegen Bridge, and scoop up some water and send it back so that they could test it. The theory being that the scientists knew that if there was an atomic plant anywhere on that river, that it could be detected in the water, unless they took extreme measures to not dump the radioactive substances back into the river. So we did that. We set up a project and went north and went out on the bridge and got the water, brought it back to Paris, and boxed it up, 4 or 5 bottles of it, and sent it to Chicago. But before we put sealed the case, we put in 2 or 3 bottles of French wine with a little note I wrote on it. Okay, test this too. Meaning, look, have a good French wine. Well, wasn't long before we got back a message that the water tested negative, but the wine was positive. Send more wine. And we didn't know how to take that. Maybe a joke. Finally, I got a message back. This is not any joke. The wine is radioactive. Send us some more wine. Well, we went back. We traced this wine back to a winery. We found out that the soil there where the wine was grown had nuclear deposits of uranium or something in there, which was soaked up into the moisture that got into the wine. And we did. We got several cases of wine, sent several cases back to the States, kept 2 or 3 cases for ourselves to enjoy, and that was the end of the wine incident. But the wine was radioactive.
That's great.
And I bet that today, if you went into very carefully tested wines that are on the market today, you'd find some that had
Sure.
some radioactivity in it. Not enough to be harmful.
That's a great story. Just out of curiosity, was Pierre de Silva part of the Pierre de Silva?
Yeah, Pierre de Silva, yeah.
Yeah, I interviewed Tom Jones. Did you know Tom Jones? Thomas O. Jones?
Tom Jones, sure.
Yeah, okay. So he told, he replaced Pierre de Silva in
Okay.
Los Alamos.
Yeah.
And he was, in a way, he talked about his mission from Groves was to calm down the community or the scientists at Los Alamos, especially Oppenheimer, after Pierre de Silva had, made these allegations that he should be removed because of his communist dealings. Anyway, I interviewed Tom Jones probably 4 years ago, and he talked about that. So I know that once they cleared Oppenheimer again, this is April of 1945 or just before that, March, I guess. And Groves was furious because he and Lansdale and Groves and Oppenheimer had to ride a train. They took a train from Pocatello, Idaho to Chicago or something to kind of, the 3 of them, cross-examining Oppenheimer with the allegation and try to, come to the bottom of it. Basically, again, it's the same old allegations that, had been made before he even was hired. It wasn't new, but it drove Groves crazy, so that he sent Pierre da Silva as far away as he could.
Yeah,
That's a sense. I don't know. I don't.
that's where I met him. We're in Tinian.
Oh,
De Silva
Tinian.
was there.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to have a big feature on him, but I've always been curious
Yeah.
about what kind of person he was.
Well, I didn't rub around with him. He was very nice with me, but I didn't have much to do with him. And I really didn't have a great deal to do with Lansdale because he was security and had a hell of a big job. I just went off on my project, and we were friendly, but that's about it. Same with Considine. I mean, Considine was a lawyer. He had another group of projects that he was handling for Groves. Very, very fine guy.
So even within the personal office of Groves, you had your independent mission and assignments and.
Yeah, that's right. I didn't have much. I got my mission from Groves, and that was the end of it.
Were you told by him not to talk to your colleagues about what you were doing? Was he trying to impose secrecy within the office, or at least, concerned about security, and so didn't want one of you to know what the other's doing, or was it just you're so busy?
No, he had a general rule of you only gave a person what he needed to know to do his job. So we didn't talk. I didn't talk to Lansdale and Considine and others about what I was doing. And they didn't talk to me either, but of course, no, that's the way it worked. It was a high degree of secrecy imposed, which carried over into my personal life after the war. I was very, very quiet about everything. I remember when I was building, I told the lumberyard what I thought they wanted to know that I needed. And very often they knew more about what I needed than I did. But there was that kind of communication problem until I kind of broke down and eventually talked and conversed with them. Secrecy was very important. In fact, the only way the bomb was developed was because, in my mind, Groves had to back off and allow the scientists to talk among themselves. It was that the scientists needed the interchange of ideas in order to solve their scientific problems in making the bomb work.
Looking back, do you think that the bomb would have, or your efforts, well, obviously there's a huge tension between the military, Groves' policy for secrecy, and the scientists and their desire for collaboration, and this compromise was made. What price did we pay for the secrecy? Do you think their project would have been better if there had been less emphasis on secrecy?
It's hard to answer that question. Things were moving very rapidly, so that it may have been that the policies that Groves had worked quite well in a rapidly moving project. No one could foresee better than the scientists how difficult it would be to keep such tight security on them. And then there was this friction between the military and the scientific people. They don't think alike. So the miracle is that Groves and Oppenheimer kind of worked it out. And things began to get better organized, and the inventive mind of the scientist was able to help create the bomb which we needed.
Can you describe how Groves and Oppenheimer worked it out? What are some of the things they did?
I don't think I can. I don't think I know because I wasn't in on any of that.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. That's fair. How about within your own sphere? How did, and I think you sort of described that pretty well already, but just maybe restate it. What role did the need to keep secrecy have on your ability to do your job in both a positive and a negative way?
Well, the positive way was when I went out and toured the country asking questions, secrecy helped me because I didn't have to tell them why I was asking the questions. And therefore the secrets, the major secrets about the project were kept. I don't know, is there any negatives to it? Not from my point of view. I think it was only when the scientists when I was involved with the scientists that they didn't want the secrecy. They would ask questions that maybe I couldn't answer. But it sort of worked out well that we kept the secret. Of course, as you know, the Russians and the Germans probably got the information they needed anyway. But
Bob, I had not a question, but maybe something you could talk about is, as you know, there was a petition. Some of the scientists didn't necessarily agree. There were various ideas about a demonstration bombing or not dropping the bomb at all and that kind of thing. Some of the scientists and others were sort of unsure about whether to go ahead with using the bomb. And I was thinking, in some ways, it was your report when you reported back to Groves and said, look, from what we can tell, the Germans don't really have anything serious in the works. Maybe using the idea in Sam Norris's book about the conversation you had with Sam Goudsmit, is that how you pronounce his name? Yeah. Where he says something like, isn't it wonderful that the Germans have no bomb, which we found. Now we don't have to use ours. And you said to him, but you understand, Sam, that if we have this weapon, we're going to use it. Something like that. I just think it's interesting that you're sort of like, in some senses, a pivot in this story, given that you reported that the Germans had no bomb, but you were also aware that it was probably going to be used anyway. So I don't know if, I know I've said a lot, but if there's some way that you can condense that into a story about your conversation with Sam Goudsmit, that could be a really useful little anecdote.
well, this is what I remember. And that is that as the war went on and it became apparent that the Germans would be defeated, the Groves turned its attention away from Germany entirely and began to talk about targets in Japan with Stimson and Roosevelt, Truman. And I overheard, maybe I was part of some of the conversation on which targets would we use. We needed 2 or 3, or at least 2 or 3. So the use of the bomb turned away from Germany quite quickly as the war progressed in our favor. But I guess we still were ready to use it in case the Russians got out of control or something like that. It's hard for me to imagine those conditions that existed right there at the end of the war. There was great fear that the Russians would just keep on coming. But they tossed around Kyoto as a prime target, and that was thrown out because it's a religious center. As our armies moved forward into Germany, and it seemed that the war would quickly end there, and that why Groves' attention for targets for the bomb concentrated his attention on targets in Japan. And he passed on a list of targets to to Stimson and to to Roosevelt, Truman, and several of the targets were dismissed, such as Kyoto. And then there was a great problem trying to find targets because we had bombed so many cities. And we wanted a city which had not been bombed yet if we could. And gradually they got at least two cities decided upon, maybe a third. I can't remember, but, and of course we had to wait till August 6th to get the plane up in the air and over into Japan. So there wasn't any real effort made to bomb in Europe, and there was this concentration of on targets in Japan, all in an effort maybe to end the war.
So what do you think of Truman's decision to decide to drop the bomb?
Well, I would say almost everybody in the project on the military side wanted to see it dropped. The scientists, I don't know. But anyway, history has really shown us that dropping that bomb was the best thing to do to end the war. It ended it almost immediately. And that was pretty solid information on which to base a decision. If you could end the war immediately, it would be worth it to drop the bomb. There was no talk about using the bomb anyway. I mean, just because we had developed it, there was no talk like that I recall. If we could have ended the war without dropping the bomb, that would be fine, but that was never an option.
It might be helpful if you could also add, I mean, and maybe this is something we can get from other sources, but just how many, the Japanese, the perception of the Japanese as being unwilling to surrender, having had all of the battles over island after island that ended in, death to the end, the same kind of severe bombing where they lost a lot of, 550,000 people died from our air raids, or our civilian conventional bombing raids from March until August.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to say something like that showed that the Japanese were, didn't seem to be wavering in their commitment to fighting to the end? Well,
from where we sat, the Japanese were determined to fight to the very end. They were under the military. The whole country was being directed by the military, and the military would not give up. That's why it's important to remember how important Hirohito's decision to get on the radio and stop the war, how important that war was, because he had to override the military to do it. Now, this has all been written up in great detail, and I'm sure you can read about it, but this is very important that we remember that Hirohito's decision, it was prime to ending the war.
You had mentioned earlier the Soviets and the role that they played, the fear that Japan had of their entering the war. And do you want to add anything about that?
I didn't understand it.
You had mentioned earlier that Japan was worried about Russia, about the Soviet Union entering the war, and that if they had to face the Russians coming in through
Yeah.
into the war, you know, that they may lose, you know, various possessions, including some of the homeland. I don't know what they're.
Yeah. It's often discussed just what would have happened if the war had been continued and the Russians were allowed to come into the war against Japan. And everybody feared that, including mostly the Americans. We didn't want to have an endless war in the Pacific. We wanted it over. Now, all we can say is that by ending the war, the Russians didn't have that choice. They got all they could, but they didn't actually enter the fight and get more territory.
Can you remember in your discussions, I get the sense that no one expected that this to be, that the war was necessarily going to end after 2 bombs. There's a 3rd one on the way, and the people assigned to Tinian were assigned for, you know, the duration. They thought they'd be there for 6 more months of raids. I don't know. What can you, if that's correct, or whatever memory you might have of what people's expectations were?
It's often discussed just how many bombs could be dropped on Japan. We had 2 bombs. The 3rd bomb was perhaps 3 weeks off. And then there were bombs after that. But we were lucky. We never had to go beyond that, beyond the 2 that we dropped. It's just a piece of luck that we could end the war when we did.
It was indeed. Let's see. Do you remember being on Tinian Island? You were on Tinian in August. What it was like when the Enola Gay crew returned? Did they return to Tinian? I've forgotten, yeah. And the feeling of the people, I mean, when did you learn that the bomb had been successful, the first bomb?
Well, the Enola Gay took off from Tinian with the first bomb and returned. They went into a debriefing section, which many people attended, and we were all quite pleased at that point that so far, so good. Now, it took a second bomb to end the war, but there was we didn't have any, I don't think there was any real expectation that the second bomb alone would do it. There was the need to, we all did not know how long we would be in Tinian or in Japan. And great war plans were had been developed, which would move tremendous numbers of troops into Japan almost immediately. So the end of the war was greatly appreciated. I really don't know whether I would be here if it hadn't ended then.
Were you scheduled to go to Japan then? What were your?
we were all scheduled to go wherever we had to go. Everywhere I go where there's a war veteran, I find a war veteran with orders, who had orders in his pocket which would take him on the invasion of Japan. Everywhere I go. It was no dream. We were going right on in.
Do those people, knowing that you were involved in the project, what do those people say? Do you find people thanking you for your part in the atomic bomb project?
Well, they may not thank me, but they thank them. They were glad the war was over. No war really ever ended like that. The atomic bomb is such a devastating bomb. I want you to read someday the report that a bombing analyst wrote after visiting targets in Japan that had been bombed. That was his job. He went after each bombing mission. He went to the bombing project and assessed the damage. 30%, 50%, whatever percent of the cities. But when he learned that one plane over Hiroshima had completely devastated the city, it wasn't there anymore, he practically went into shock. It never, in other words, the bombing missions don't do that. They destroy, but not completely. They're bad, they're very bad, and we lose a lot of planes doing it, but the atomic bomb as a force which is almost impossible for us to appreciate. And looking into the future, we got to remember that, because we've had enough atomic bombs, and we hope we don't have to use any more anybody anywhere.
Being philosophical about the future, what advice would you give? I mean, what do you think of the effort newly launched to try to eliminate nuclear weapons? Do you think that's something that is attainable, or do you think, what would you say to the next generation about how hard they should try to understand what these weapons can do, and why diplomacy is a better way to solve the world's problems, or whatever? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but.
Well, there is every reason to try to limit or limit, or at least limit, if not eliminate, atomic weapons. But the United States must do its part. It has a disadvantage in that they are asking the world around them not to engage in atomic weapons or weaponry when the United States itself has such a big stockpile of them. So it's going to be a diplomatic effort on the part of the United States to try to overcome any unwillingness on the parts of other nations to build bombs. And we probably were going to have to offer to give away more and more control over our use of the pile of weapons we have. Very difficult question to answer. no one wants to take a chance. Diplomacy is the only way that we're going to be able to bring peace.
You're right about that. Let's see. I guess we have, you wanna stretch again? I'm just looking at these questions. I was thinking of going back to, you know, your time with the German scientists. Werner Heisenberg is often quoted, maybe it's from the farm house, or what is it, farm hall transcripts, how amazed he was that the United States had the bomb. Do you have anything that you can, did you get a sense from your interviews with these German scientists, or from being there at the time, how surprised they were and unbelieving that the United States had succeeded?
I don't think I can answer that question because I never went there to meet them at Farm Hall. The development of an atomic bomb is a difficult venture. Therefore, it takes a lot of great minds to put one of these bombs together that work. You can create a dirty bomb if you want, without too much trouble. A dirty bomb would be one that would often perhaps spread nuclear poisons over a half a mile. Wouldn't be the big explosion. It wouldn't be the big bomb, but and it's certainly something we have to avoid because it would take years to rehabilitate those areas where bombs like that were exploded. Well, better ask me another question.
Okay, that's good.
Cindy, it could be interesting to hear about the, maybe just your experiences, the adventure you had carrying the bomb from, both in the convoy when the car tire blew out, but also when you were aboard the Indianapolis.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically, maybe you could just describe transporting the bomb from Los Alamos to Tinian. You mentioned it already, but maybe just, a couple of those details would be interesting.
One of the things I was asked to do was take the bomb from Los Alamos to Tinian. I went out and received the bomb, and I remember the authorities at Los Alamos wanted a receipt that I'd received it. So I signed a receipt for an atomic bomb, which is kind of nice to frame, wouldn't it? But then they decided it was too secret for me to keep the receipt, and they actually developed a receipt for the receipt that I had just given them. Then I took the bomb in a convoy down the mountain. I was in the center Jeep with the bomb, and there was a couple of Jeeps ahead of me, a couple behind, and we were on our way to Albuquerque, the Air Force Base there, where we would pick up a couple of planes, 3 planes. Pretty much, the trip was pretty much without incident, except we had a flat tire, and the whole project, this very secret, very important project, stood by the side of the road while some GI fixed a tire. But we went on down. Makes you think of the, you know, the GI, the picture of the GI with a minesweeper walking ahead down the road. You can see that the whole behind him was 75 trucks following this one man with a minesweeper. Same thing. Anyway, but at Albuquerque we had a delay in which, because the planes weren't ready. Finally, I got on a plane with the bomb. There was a plane ahead of me and one behind me, and my orders were to make sure that I went with the bomb wherever it went I was to go. And we all had parachutes, and we flew without incident over to San Francisco and turned the bomb over and took the bomb aboard the Indianapolis, which then sailed the Pacific and delivered the bomb to the Air Force over there, 509th Composite Group, that then flew it into Japan. This was, what I carried was really half the bomb. Because if I had the whole bomb, the thing would blow up at any time under certain circumstances. So the other half was flown over. I kind of think the Navy wanted to be part of this project, so that's why half of it went on a Navy ship, the other part the Air Force took. Of course, the Indianapolis is a story all by itself. Fortunately, we got off at Tinian. A few days later, the Indianapolis was sunk in the Chinese Sea somewhere, Yellow Sea.
I know it's it's an incredible story.
Hmm.
I mean, that whole story.
Yeah.
You must have been glad you were no longer on it.
Oh, boy.
My goodness. Well, did you get to know the captain at the?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Okay. Very tough. There's some, you know, there's been a lot talked about Morris or Mo Berg. Did you know him?
Yes.
Yes. Can you tell us how?
Mo Berg was a baseball player of some note in the major leagues. And he was recruited by the OSS and became an agent for them, and went abroad during World War II. We used to see him occasionally. Now he became we ran into him occasionally because he was looking. He might be in the same spots, same places that we were. He was. I was not part of this, but apparently Groves decided to see if Heisenberg could be eliminated, and that's another story where Moberg was involved in tracking down Heisenberg in Switzerland. But that's really the end of the story. It's probably a good idea that that such a plan was not carried out because it would have caused the Germans to see the immediate importance of an atomic bomb, and our involvement in our manufacture of the bomb would be more apparent to them. They might have changed their targets.
You went to Princeton too, right?
Yeah. Yes.
But you didn't overlap, I don't.
No, I don't know. I don't know what class he was.
I just read he spoke 7 languages or something. Did you, since you were in Europe all those months, do you know or did you learn French and German?
I got so I could speak French. I immediately, German no. I was very poor anyway in French, and the little bit I knew got me into trouble, because as soon as you began to speak French, they immediately would not speak English anymore. So, yes, I studied French and tried to get so I could talk to the French people, but it probably would have been better if I hadn't, because you really have to be awfully good at probably have to live there for a while. Did you take French?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
And I agree completely.
Yeah.
You have to live there to really become fluent.
Yeah.
So, and I can completely sympathize.
Yeah.
Let's see. Talked about that. Oh, I know. I wanted to have you tell us the story that you told before, but it's going to be better quality on this, about Mrs. O'Leary having to find a man who some of her generals could ask questions of. You want to tell that story?
Well, General Groves had a executive secretary. Her name was Jean O'Leary, and she sat right outside his office and received his calls, took all his dictation, made all his arrangements for him. She was a terrific person, very, very able. But in those days, not like today, women weren't recognized. And some of these generals would not talk to a woman and they would demand to talk to somebody else. So a call would come in from, say, Lucius Clay, General Clay, for General Groves, and I don't know whether Clay was the one or not, but anyway, she would turn the phone over to me, and I would make notes and then give her the notes, and she would tell me what to say to Clay, see? So there was this problem, and it was something which we have gradually overcome over the years, but it was quite prevalent then. Not too many women were heads of organizations, not too many women ran companies. Today it's kind of common. She was a great friend and a good organizer. The general depended upon her completely.
Okay.
Details, no. I just knew enough to get around the projects and this visit with the scientists. I relied on my basic information on nuclear science to help me understand what they were trying to do. But That was, of course, very helpful. The general made a big effort to educate me. He sent some of his top scientists in to talk to me. At one particular time, he asked Dr. Tolman, who was a big scientist from Caltech, to instruct me. So Dr. Tolman, thinking what he was going to tell me was super secret, which it was, he had me meet him in Woods Hole up in Connecticut. Is that where it is, Connecticut?
Massachusetts.
Massachusetts. And we went out in a sailboat. And then he talked. There's nobody around. He'd tell me everything I should know. But that gives you an idea of how much secrecy there was around here. He wouldn't talk to me in a place that might be wired or might be overheard. Or great guy.
When you first heard about, when Groves and some of the scientists first told you about the plan to build the bomb, did you, obviously you probably deferred to the scientists because they knew more about how it worked than you, but did you think that this was a stupendous idea, or did you think it might just work? Were you surprised? Did it seem...
No, from the education I'd had, I knew it would work. But what scared everybody was that there might be several other ways it could work too, that we weren't making all the approaches to the problem possible. In other words, one scientist said to me, I really don't know whether some guy could develop this in his kitchen. No, it couldn't happen, but that gives you the thought that we were in the frontier of scientific knowledge, working our way forward. And that explains why there was 150 scientists at Los Alamos. Needed all these people working together to focus on a solution. And it's still true today. I mean, we can't handle this stuff with just 2 or 3 people in a laboratory. And anytime you're trying to work on an atomic bomb, you've got to have a whole cadre of well-trained people. Can't make a mistake.
Do you think that, there were bets taken at Trinity as to whether this gadget was going to work or not work. And at that time, there were many that thought pessimistically that it really wasn't going to work, that this was a very uncertain, high-stakes gamble that Groves had undertaken. And I think, certainly earlier before Trinity, a lot of the companies he tried to recruit, or did recruit, were skeptical that they'd be able to do this, certainly within the time to be of use in the war. You want to talk about that?
Well, Trinity was a test project in the desert there at Alamogordo, where they tested the second bomb. Don't forget, I was already on my way with the first bomb, which worked on another principle. The first bomb was two highly concentrated, enriched uranium balls, which were fired together, and the critical mass was exceeded, and the bomb went off. Now, the other bomb was a plutonium bomb. The bomb itself, when I saw it in Tinian, was a great big ball about the size of a basketball, maybe larger, covered with RDX explosives, shaped explosives. And they fired the damn explosives. They fired the explosives which compressed the plutonium center, and the bomb went off. 2 different techniques. So maybe the first one was going to work anyway. It was kind of an elementary. They never built another one like it. And The second one was the Wave of the Future. They're all plutonium bombs now.
Can you explain why they went to look at both these two very different types of bomb? Why did Groves look at both or pursue both a plutonium-based and a uranium-based bomb?
I can't answer that question. I don't know. There's Groves calling you right now.
You're not supposed to ask that question. Okay. It's sort of,
Let me just offhand say that as the project developed, they found a way to make plutonium. They were already with the first bomb, so they used it. Now, the second bomb with plutonium is easier to make and cheaper. So that's just offhand.
One of the sort of themes of our exhibit will be the amazing alliance between the government, the military, and academia. And especially in that Groves, through his connections from his experience in building all the camps and facilities for the Army and the Pentagon, he had gotten to know leading companies that he then turned to help out with the atomic bomb project. And that if he could quickly, know that he had confidence in DuPont, for example, and bring them into the game, so forth and so on. And then also the university connections. I mean, I credit Oppenheimer with knowing a lot of university people, or maybe Groves did too, I don't know. Could you sort of talk about how effective a coalition was put together and how some of that, stemmed back to Groves's work earlier to build all these munitions facilities and so forth?
Groves was a mover, a big action man, well organized, and he was able to think in large terms, large projects that you and I just, we're not able to do. I can't think of building a plant half the size of Rhode Island. He was able to, because of his experience building all the camps and so forth, he got even better than ever in managing tremendous projects. The Manhattan Project is a tremendous project. It's built 3 or 4 cities. It managed research in 6 or 7 universities. And he had to keep his finger on all of that. But he had this ability, which not everybody has, of being a ultra manager. He got to know everybody. But that isn't the principal thing. The principal thing was in his ability to act in a very decisive way on very, very large projects. Hard to find a man like that. He was an extraordinary manager. As a man to work for, he was demanding, but most people say he was quite kind to them. He didn't. He expected results, but the relationships that we all had with him were good. He didn't like to waste time. He was quite sympathetic if you got into a spot. But mainly he was a pusher. So he learned that from Somerville, I guess. General Somerville was his boss prior to the Manhattan Project. Somerville moved on to be head of supply for the Army. Imagine that job. Somerville was a tremendous mover and shaker to be able to envision a way of supplying 11 million people in the field, overseas. and munitions contracts, and so there was two great engineer leaders there that we were very thankful to have.
Do you think, what is it of General Grove's background that might have created such a person? I mean, was it something to do that he had, I don't know, so much confidence in himself? I mean, how did you come to understand who he was and how he became who he was? I mean, maybe you had some insight into that.
It's a good question, and maybe Dick Groves can answer that. The son. I don't think I could venture. His training was standard. I mean, good training. First, he went to the academy, of course. Came out high. And the academy schools did teach people how to manage well, be good managers, but he was an extraordinary one.
Let's see. We've really. Now, Stan Norris, in his book, Stan talks about Groves as creating really an intelligence revolution. I mean, what he did to create these, the security unit and the intelligence unit and this overseas intelligence unit and counterintelligence. He really did all of that superbly well, but and then the secrecy, his obsession with his secrecy meant that he was hugely powerful, and that knowledge is power, and he's the only one who really knew it. And even in his book, his memoir, Now It Can Be Told, talks about how he once wanted to go to visit Churchill in England, but he had to decline because he realized if he went down, so much of the information, was all in his head. I don't know. Did you ever think about, oh gosh, what would happen if, General Groves had a mishap or somehow his plane was shot down? What would happen to the project? I mean, was it really?
Your question is a good one, but most of us realized that we had a job to do. Number two, things were moving very rapidly. So we didn't have the luxury of trying to think of a what if Groves died or something. Also, the war itself was such a tremendous threat to us all that we were, I guess most of would say we could find another leader if we had to, but don't forget this was a wartime, and tremendous dangers existed everywhere. I remember one of the scientists had a father, one of the nuclear scientists on the project, his father was on the Italian front, an officer, infantry officer, and his father wrote back, this is pretty horrible stuff I'm going through over here, and his son wrote back, well, just hang in there because I can't tell you what I'm doing, but it's going to end the war. The father wrote back, glad to hear it, but is there any chance it could be tomorrow or the next day? I don't know whether I can last much longer. As a matter of fact, he died. It's a terrible struggle. War is no fun. I didn't have to suffer what a lot of people had to go through fighting their way forward, you know.
I think that's all very helpful. It's so easy to people, you know, who haven't been involved in the Iraq War, you know, like 99% of the
Yeah.
American people, to forget that all this happened in the middle of a war. You know, they ask,
Yeah.
should we have dropped the bomb, as if there was some kind of calm living room debate, you know, there wasn't a war going on, it was, yeah, an abstract issue,
Mm.
it's not, it wasn't.
I also had picked up a report. One of my intelligence sources sent me a report that an old lady in France had seen a train load go by with barrels of chemicals marked. How was it marked as? Uranium oxide. It was marked uranium oxide. And they were going past her, and she got this intelligence report out, and it reached America. I got it. So uranium oxide is uranium. That's what it is. I mean, it's one of the first products out of the mine. You take it to a factory, and they make this oxide, and came out of France, and it seemed to me that Belgians had the refineries for it, because the uranium was being mined in the Belgian Congo. So I took it to Groves and said, I'm on to something. So he said, well, go up to see Sanjay. He's head of the Belgian Minière, which is a big mining company. See what he says. So I went up to see him, and he said, no, this doesn't mean anything, nothing at all. His words were, an elephant could come through that door before I would believe that this had any value. So I went back, and after talking with Groves, I decided I'd go to Europe and organize a search. So I went over to France, and at that time Eisenhower was down on the French coast in a trailer. The big movement had not yet started up the north. And, well, I'm wrong about that. The movement had gone as far as the Dutch border. But he had his headquarters here in General Smith, and there on the French coast. And Pash went with me, and Pash had jeeps and men, and people could help, you know, and Pash himself is a dynamo. So we went in to see General Smith, the executive officer. While we were there, of course, Eisenhower comes by and asks Smith to go out to lunch with him, which I guess he did, but not before he gave us the clearance to go up there and look for this stuff. So we went up there, Pash and a couple of loads of jeeps, and that was the only time I was right up on the firing line. And there in the warehouse, we found this big warehouse full of this U-308. And it's 3 parts uranium, 8 parts oxygen. And we arranged, the British were with us, we took some British with us. The British were with us, and with the British, we arranged for about 20 airplanes and a convoy of trucks. And we took the stuff out of the factory, out of the warehouse. The Germans were right there. I mean, they fired at us once, twice maybe. And the story is that I was still in my Washington uniform. You know, everybody else was in combat uniform. And the story was that the Germans saw me there, and they realized that if the Americans are moving their headquarters up that close, they better move back. So the next day they moved back 20 miles. That's just a story. But they did move back. And we transported that stuff by air to Britain, where it was kept in safety, and I guess they used it. But later on, I realized that the train was going in two directions. I mean, it was picking up the stuff, but taking it down into France, lower France. And we went down there, Pash and I, and found a big supply of uranium, the same stuff, in a warehouse near Marseille. So we went over to the Navy and loaded all this uranium on a ship. And the ship joined a convoy. Before it left, I had a radio that I had confiscated somewhere, and I put the radio in with everything else. And I mentioned this because the stuff got to America and was put in storage, but whoever handled it delivered my radio to my parents. I don't know quite how that collection was, but now I knew that they got it anyway. Anyway, that's the sort of thing you had to do. And I must mention this, when Groves got me started, almost the same week, he got a letter for me, introducing me to whom it may concern, from General Strong. General Strong was G2 of the Army, big shot. In it didn't make any demands. It said, this is Major Furman. He's on an extremely important secret mission. If any way you could help him, please help him, or drop dead, sign, whatever. And I carried that throughout the war. And of course, that's how I got those damn the Navy to put the stuff on a ship for me. Anytime I wanted to travel, I didn't have travel orders. I just took my letter over to the Air Transport Command. They gave me a ticket, whatever it was. And I used it everywhere to get into corporate offices, meet with scientists. And it helped them a lot, got us a lot of information.
So tell us, how old were you during the war?
About 20, this is when I was about 28, maybe. I was born in 15, so in 1940, I was 25. So he picked me up, 43. I picked you up, I was 28. But I was very important, 28, of course.
Do you think that...
Most of us were young, most of us.
you-
Everybody you worked with, young, all young people.
That's true. I mean, I think the average age at Los Alamos was 25.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Picture. Incidentally, I have a portfolio of pictures, all labeled with all the people's names and everything, accumulated when I was on Tinian. Picture of the plane, a picture of the huts and all the various generals that came over to greet the Enola Gay when it came back. And someday I'll show them to you. That's pretty neat.
That'd be great. I think what we can do, we'll come out and see you and bring our scanner and just scan
Mhm.
them all in. That would be great. And then record your notes about them, so we
Yeah,
get it straight.
the beauty of the pictures is they're all labeled with the names of the people in the pictures. I'm not in it. I mean, I worked with the Army photo group in Tinian, and they gave me a complete set. Give me 2 complete sets.
So how do you feel about, in looking back over your long life, and all that you've accomplished, how do you feel about those years working on the Manhattan Project?
Well, it was an unusual experience. Of course, when you spend 50 years in a building business, that's also an unusual experience. You wonder why you survived that too. But life made a lot of lifelong friends. I certainly was in the center of things, the center of the war. That's why I guess everybody's so interested in it. The Pentagon was the central project. Now the atomic bomb project was nothing like it. I ended up the war with 30 shirts. I used to keep shirts in Italy and in England, as well as over here, so I could carry an extra bottle of booze if I had to. With a bottle of whiskey, you could get a Jeep for a week. So, but it took me about 5 years or 6 years to wear out all those shirts.
So you had all these shirts that you then carried around? Shirt? Are you saying shirts?
They're regular uniform shirts, yeah. They're all khaki shirts, you know.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I see. You had to have different ones issued when you were in Italy?
Well, I left some shirts there so I wouldn't have to carry them next time I came back. I made 5 trips to Europe. The first trip, of course, was when Rome fell, and we went into Italy to talk to the Italian scientists. That's where I met Mo Berg for the first time. He was there too for the same reason. And 4 other trips to England or France.
What did you learn about the Italian effort?
We learned that they were excluded by the Germans from any important stuff. The 2 Germans, the 2 Italian scientists, Dr. Wick and Dr. Amaldi, I remember those 2. There was a third one whose name I can't remember, but they were not in on anything. So we came away with the feeling that the project could be there, that they weren't including the Italians in the project if there was one. But that was, 1944, I guess. Yeah. The Alsace mission was a separate mission organized that I had a hand in organizing. Vannevar Bush appointed Goudsmit to head up the scientific side. Vannevar Bush, was head of the ORD, Office of Research and Development. And he managed and placed all the scientists during the war. That isn't all he did, but that's one of his things. So Goudsmit was there, and Goudsmit had to have a way of getting around, so The military side of it was handled by Pash, Colonel Pash, who was a very energetic guy, very good officer. They had 4 or 5 scientists there all the time, and then there were a number of scientists that came and went. We just opened the door, and if scientific people wanted to come over and sit with us, sit with the mission, fine. But they were there, and they were constantly interviewing people, covering all the scientific disciplines, rocketry, munitions, whatever. And buried in this mission, we had 3 atomic scientists. I can think of 2 of them. I guess Gaussman was one. Wartenberg from DuPont was another, and there was I'll think of it in a minute. It doesn't matter. But anyway, this is the way we hid our interest in another mission. In other words, we didn't want this mission to be known as the Atomic Energy Interested Commission. So we set up a multi-discipline mission and buried our people in it. I went over there and spent some time with them. Then we had Lansdale set up an officer in England who would work with the British on intelligence continuously. And that was the effort. Lansdale didn't come over until the war was almost over. And he spent all of his time on security matters here in the States. I had a number of meetings with Niels Bohr, the Danish scientist, who thought he knew what was going on in Germany, and he was approximately right. But I met him both in England and in the United States.
Question on that. In the Hyde Park memo, there's a memo that was summing up the exchange or the meeting that Winston Churchill had with Roosevelt in September of 1944. And the memo is only about 3 paragraphs, 3 sentences really. One's dealing with after the war cooperation, and another one that sort of, strangely enough, deals with Niels Bohr. And Churchill apparently had great distrust of Niels Bohr.
Oh, he did?
Yes. And he said, we need to track him down, we need to contain him, he's a big risk. I don't know. Do you have any sense of, did Groves feel that way?
No, I hadn't heard of this before. It surprises me. Niels Bohr came over and gave us a lot of help on the scientific side. He knew pretty much what was going on in Germany, but nobody was sure. Fine man.
Just curious. Did you get to know Leo Szilard in Chicago? Szilard?
Szilard. No, I never knew Szilard. I read a lot about him. I think I probably met him once. I read his book, the book that your friend
Leonard.
will be with us. I read his book.
Right.
Great job. Groves did not like Szilard. I don't know whether I can really. I know that I don't know enough to talk about it, but it's just generally. I guess we better not talk about Szilard.
What other little stories have we not prompted you to tell that we really should? Funny stories or human interest stories or near escapes? I don't know. I'm just, I love many of the stories you've told. You've
covered about everything. I'll think, if I think of some, I'll let you know. I just think that it's wonderful that you've got this interest and going to try to maintain a library of facts about the project so that we, as we go forward into the future, we can work in such a way as to avoid any thought of using nuclear weapons.
Can you say something? Do you start that, because that's a wonderful thought. So sort of, could you make another sort of a summary statement if you had along those lines that we could use maybe so that you can tell people they got to take this seriously as we go in the future, not to make use of these things?
Well, to sum it all up, the dropping of the atomic bomb started the atomic age. We are in the atomic age now 50, 60 years. It's still the biggest thing that we have to manage. And we hope that we can have leaders in this country who will help in a worldwide project, help us all live with both the benefits and the great destructive values of being in this atomic times.
I assume that you were not so much involved with all the early Cold War efforts to fashion international controls and all that. I mean, right? I mean, you went off to the private sector. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a choice at the end of the war to either go back and get my doctorate in physics and stay with nuclear work, or to start my own construction company. And I decided that I knew best what to do in a construction company, so that's what I did. Although it would have been fascinating to have become part of the post-war nuclear efforts. But it's funny, I remember I knew so many people in the Manhattan Project that I was building for a doctor, a medical building or something, and he said to me, well, we'll have to close this meeting because I'm meeting some very important nuclear scientists, and of course he meant by that I was not up to that, not up to their level. So I excused myself, and on my way out I met the scientists. And they were people I knew. We had a nice talk. My client wasn't quite sure what to do with me after that.
That's great.
There was a time, after the war when they would come by to see me, and I had a house in Georgetown. I had a chance to visit with them, but that soon tapered off. They